Okay, so you know that weird feeling, right? You learn a new word, or maybe you notice a new kind of car, and then bam, all of a sudden you start seeing it absolutely everywhere. It feels like the world just changed overnight. Well, it turns out that's a really common cognitive bias, kind of like a glitch in our brain software. But what if I told you that this very same brain glitch is being used by doctors to save lives in a really high-stakes medical mystery? Yeah, let's dive into this.
So, first, let's just talk about that feeling, this little trick our mind plays on us. It actually has a name, and once you hear it, well, you're probably going to start noticing it a lot more often. It's called the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon. And really, all it means is that moment when you learn something new, and then you suddenly see it everywhere. The key here is the thing itself hasn't become more common. Your brain has just been, well, it's been primed to finally see what was there all along.
It's a fun little quirk of psychology, isn't it? But here's where our story takes a really sharp turn. What if we could actually use this bias for good? What if a doctor's awareness, powered by this phenomenon, was the only thing standing between a patient and a deadly bleed?
Okay, so let's meet the villain of our story. It's a kind of medical fugitive, a super elusive and dangerous condition known as a Dieulafoy's lesion.
So what even is it? A Dieulafoy's lesion, or DL for short, is basically a rogue blood vessel, an artery that's way wider than it should be, just hiding right under the surface lining of your GI tract. And the scary part? It can burst with absolutely no warning. The medical paper we're looking at literally calls it a calamitous situation.
And this is what makes it so terrifying. The actual defect is tiny. We're talking smaller than 3 millimeters. But because of how it's built, the bleeding it can cause is just catastrophic.
So what makes it so dangerous? This is what's so fascinating. Normally, your arteries branch out and get smaller and smaller until they're these tiny little things called capillaries. A Dieulafoy's lesion just doesn't do that. It stays wide, like up to 10 times its normal size, all the way to the surface. So when it breaks through, it's not a tiny leak. It's like a fire hose went off.
So where does this thing hide? Well, about 70% of the time, it's in the stomach. But as you can see, it can pop up pretty much anywhere else in the gastrointestinal tract. And that, of course, just makes the hunt that much harder for doctors.
And this gets us right to the heart of the challenge. Finding a deal is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is bleeding and the needle only shows up every once in a while. So let's break down why it is so incredibly tough to catch. Okay, so patients usually show up with some really dramatic signs of major internal bleeding. The most common is something called melena, which happens in about 44% of cases. Next up is hematemesis, vomiting blood. I mean, these are seriously scary symptoms that get doctors moving fast.
But here is the truly shocking part. Even with a patient actively bleeding, the chance of a doctor diagnosing it on the very first endoscopic search is only 49%. That is less than a coin toss. Why? Because the lesion is tiny, it can be totally hidden by blood, and it doesn't even bleed all the time. It is ridiculously easy to miss. So doctors have to be incredibly vigilant. They're trained to hunt for these 3 very specific signs. You've got active, spurting blood coming out of a tiny defect, a little vessel just poking through otherwise normal tissue, or a fresh blood clot that's stuck to a tiny little spot. If they don't see one of those, the fugitive just gets away.
But when they do find it, that's when they can finally move in. This is the moment the hunt pays off, when doctors can corner the culprit and, most importantly, stop that catastrophic bleed.
And wow, this image says it all. This is a real picture from the case study. You see that tiny little spot of red? That's the Dieulafoy's lesion. It's actively bleeding from this minuscule point in what otherwise looks like totally healthy tissue. This is the source of that calamitous situation.
Once they find it, the #1 goal is hemostasis, which is just a fancy way of saying stop the bleeding. In the case from our source material, they used a method that's basically a form of electrocoagulation, using heat to seal that rogue vessel shut for good.
And here it is, the aftershot. This is the exact same spot, just a few moments later. The bleeding is stopped, the threat is gone. It is an absolutely incredible example of modern medicine at work.
All right, let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Remember that brain glitch? This is where it all connects. This is where this rare medical condition and the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon come together to create a powerful, life-saving tool.
Just look at this progress. Back in the 1970s, the mortality rate from one of these lesions was a staggering 30%. Today, it's down to 8%.
And that incredible improvement isn't just because of better technology, it's because of better awareness. More doctors simply know what to look for.
And the authors of the paper we're looking at are totally open about this. They say it right there in the text. Their whole goal in publishing this research is to intentionally trigger the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon in other doctors, to plant the idea of this rare lesion in their minds so they'll be primed and ready to spot it.
So that's the real takeaway here. Spreading the word about rare diseases isn't just about sharing facts, it's about fundamentally changing the perception of the people on the front lines. It's about turning a cognitive bias from a funny little quirk into a life-saving diagnostic instinct.
In the end, it doesn't matter if it's a new word, a new car, or a nearly invisible bleeding lesion. The world itself doesn't actually change when we learn about something. Our ability to perceive it does. And in medicine, that change in perception can be the most powerful tool of all.